It's wonderful to see you all again. I've got an extraordinary tale to tell you today.
Serena laughed as she smeared a glob of chocolate frosting across Elena's silk blouse in front of the city's entire social elite. The sound was high and melodic, the practiced trill of a woman who knew exactly where the cameras were positioned. Around them, the conservatory of the Vance estate hummed with the elite's hushed conversations, the air thick with the cloying scent of white lilies and Serena's expensive, rose-gold perfume. "Oh, Elena, I am so sorry," Serena cooed, though her eyes remained as hard as flint. She didn't reach for a napkin. Instead, she turned to the group of influencers and board members surrounding them, her expression shifting instantly into one of performative pity. "You see what I mean? She's just getting so disconnected. She doesn't even realize she's standing in the way of the dessert tray anymore." Elena Vance didn't flinch. She felt the sticky weight of the frosting seeping into the delicate fabric of her blouse, a cold, ruinous smear against her skin. She kept her gaze slightly vacant, her shoulders slumped in the posture of a woman whose spirit had been dimmed by the very cognitive decline her sister so loudly lamented. Behind that mask, however, Elena's mind was a razor-sharp ledger, recording every insult, every smirk, and every witness. Arthur Vance, their father, stood a few feet away, swirling a glass of vintage scotch. He caught Elena's eye for a fleeting second before looking away, his attention returning to the gold leaf molding of the ceiling. He was the great enabler, a man who preferred a comfortable lie to a difficult truth, especially when that truth involved the daughter who brought him social prestige versus the one who brought him shame with her supposed illness. "It's okay," Elena whispered, her voice intentionally thin. She reached up to touch the frosting, letting her hand tremble just enough. I should have been more careful, Serena." "You certainly should have," Serena snapped, the sweetness vanishing the moment she thought the cameras had turned toward the floral arrangements. She leaned in closer, the sharp metallic scent of her champagne-heavy breath hitting Elena's face. "This event cost 6 figures, Elena. Try not to ruin it with your pathetic little episodes." "Honestly, why Father insists on dragging you out of your room is beyond me. You're a ghost, Elena. Start acting like one." Serena turned her back, her designer heels clicking sharply against the Carrara marble floors, a status sound that echoed through the room. She began holding court again, her hands gesturing wildly as she bragged about the charity she was launching, a foundation for neurological health that was, in reality, a front for the systematic draining of the Vance family trust. Elena moved toward the shadows of the arched windows, away from the glare of the chandeliers. She felt a presence beside her before she saw him. Julian Thorne leaned against the stone pillar, his dark suit impeccable, his eyes scanning the room with the predatory grace of a man who knew where all the bodies were buried. "The frosting was a nice touch," Julian murmured, his voice too low for anyone else to catch. "Very Cinderella's evil sister. She's getting bolder." "Arrogance makes people sloppy," Elena replied, her voice no longer thin or trembling. It was the cold, precise tone of the forensic auditor she had been before she went underground. "She thinks she's already won. She thinks the doctors she's bribing and the papers she's forged have turned me into a nonentity." Elena reached into her small, unassuming clutch. Her fingers brushed against a sleek, black device. With a subtle movement, she checked the display. The recording was crystal clear. Every word of Serena's verbal abuse, every admission of her gaslighting, was being digitally etched into a weapon. "Did you get the signatures?" Julian asked. "She signed the caregiver documents this morning," Elena said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. She was so busy checking her follower count that she didn't realize she was actually signing a waiver for a full forensic audit of the estate's secondary accounts. She thinks she's securing her power of attorney. She's actually opening the door to her own prison. Across the room, Serena was laughing again, tossing her head back as she accepted a toast from a local senator. She looked radiant, powerful, and utterly untouchable. She didn't notice the way Elena was watching her now. The vacant look was gone, replaced by a cold, predatory focus. Elena looked down at the chocolate stain on her blouse. It was a badge of Serena's entitlement, a physical manifestation of the years of medical gaslighting and the slow poisoning of her reputation. For months, Elena had played the victim, swallowing the bitter pills Serena provided and nodding blankly as the world was told she was losing her mind. She had lived in the dark so she could learn exactly how the shadows moved. 2 weeks until the gala, Elena said, her voice a low promise. 2 weeks until the world sees the real Serena Vance. The countdown is on, Julian agreed, pushing off the pillar. I'll have the legal team standing by. Just make sure she stays this confident. An arrogant enemy is a predictable one. Elena watched Julian disappear into the crowd. She turned back to the window, her reflection in the dark glass showing a woman the world no longer recognized. She wasn't a ghost. She was a reckoning. Serena called out from the center of the room, her voice dripping with fake concern. Elena, dear, come back over here. You need to apologize to the senator for your appearance. He was just asking about your condition. Elena took a deep breath, the scent of the lilies suddenly smelling like a funeral, not hers but Serena's. She slumped her shoulders, let her gaze go soft and unfocused, and stepped back into the light. Coming, Serena, she whispered. The sleeping lion was awake, and the hunt had officially begun. The next morning, the Vance estate smelled of expensive bleach and cold intentions. Serena Vance stood in the sun-drenched kitchen, her movements fluid and practiced, as she tossed kale, ginger, and a small, unlabeled vial of clear liquid into a professional-grade blender. The machine's high-pitched scream echoed off the Italian marble backsplashes, a violent, grating sound for a house that pretended to be a sanctuary. Elena watched from the doorway, her shoulders slumped in the practiced posture of a woman losing her grip on reality. She wore a faded cardigan that had seen better years, a stark contrast to the $3,000 silk robe her sister favored. Her eyes, however, were sharp beneath her hooded lids, tracking every calculated movement Serena made. The sleeping lion wasn't just awake, she was taking notes. There you are, darling, Serena said, her voice a saccharine melody as she poured the thick, green sludge into a crystal glass. She didn't look up to greet her sister. She was too busy checking her reflection in the polished chrome of the toaster, adjusting a stray blonde hair. You look exhausted. Did the shadows keep you up again? You were talking in your sleep about Mother's jewelry. It was quite concerning. I couldn't sleep, Elena whispered, shuffling toward the kitchen island. She forced her hand to shake as she reached for the glass, the cold condensation chilling her skin. Arthur Vance sat at the head of the breakfast table, his face hidden behind the financial section of the morning paper. He didn't look up when Elena stumbled. Listen to your sister, Elena, he muttered, his voice thick with a father's weary disappointment. She's the only reason this family isn't a tabloid headline right now. Your condition is a heavy burden for her to carry. The least you can do is be grateful. The sting of his dismissal was a familiar ache, but Elena used it as fuel. She watched Serena lean over the counter, the cloyingly sweet scent of her designer perfume, the kind that cost more than a month's rent for most people, filling the space between them. Drink up, Serena urged, sliding the glass forward with a manicured hand. The Vance Foundation Gala is only 10 days away. I need you presentable, even if you can't speak. I've already told the board you'll be stepping down officially that night. It's for your own good, sweetie. You clearly can't handle the stress of the forensic accounts anymore. 10 days. The countdown had a physical weight, a ticking clock that only Elena and her hidden allies could hear. I'm not sure I'm ready to sign anything, Elena said, her voice thin and wavering. Serena's smile didn't reach her eyes. She reached out, patting Elena's cheek with a condescending, rhythmic tap. You don't have to be ready, you just have to be compliant. Now drink. Or do I have to call the clinic again? You remember how loud it was in that ward, don't you? All those people screaming. You wouldn't want to go back there. It was a blatant threat, a reminder of the 2 weeks Elena had spent drugged in a private facility after Serena first started the rumors of her cognitive decline. Elena's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with a cold, simmering rage that threatened to break her facade. She picked up the glass, the green liquid smelling faintly of metallic bitterness hidden beneath the sharp tang of ginger. "I'll take it to the garden," Elena murmured. "The air might help the dizziness." "Fine, but finish every drop," Serena snapped, already turning her attention to her phone. "I have a meeting with Chloe Sims about the seating arrangements. That girl is useless and has the backbone of a noodle, but she does what she's told, unlike some people in this house." Elena turned and retreated toward the glass doors leading to the conservatory. As soon as she was out of their line of sight, she ducked behind a towering monstera plant. With the practiced ease of a magician, she pulled a small, sterilized vial from the hidden pocket of her cardigan. She tipped the crystal glass, carefully pouring a portion of the toxic smoothie into the container. She sealed it tight, feeling the small wind vibrate through her nerves. This was sample number 4. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from Julian Thorne appeared on the darkened screen. "The offshore accounts are moving. She's draining the Foundation's reserve into a shell company. We need the lab results from the blood work by Friday to lock the criminal charges." Elena looked back through the glass. Serena was laughing at something on her screen, tossing her hair back with an air of untouchable triumph. She looked like a queen in her castle, entirely unaware that the foundations were already rotting beneath her feet. Elena raised the glass to her lips, letting a single drop of the liquid touch her tongue, just enough to recognize the chemical aftertaste. She poured the rest into the soil of a dying orchid, watching the dark liquid disappear into the dirt. 10 days, Serena," she whispered to the empty garden. "Enjoy the throne while it lasts." The hunt wasn't just beginning. It was accelerating, and the trap was almost set. 2 days later, the sterile, ozone-heavy air of Julian Thorne's private suite felt like the only place Elena could breathe without tasting copper. She sat across from him, her fingers tracing the condensation on a glass of mineral water. The high-end air purifier hummed a low, digital lullaby in the corner, a sharp contrast to the suffocating silence of the Vance estate. Julian slid a sleek, black flash drive across the polished obsidian desk. "The architect's ledger," he said, his voice a low gravel of satisfaction. "It's all there, Elena. I had my team cross-reference the shell companies Serena established in the Cayman Islands. She wasn't just skimming. She was gutting the Foundation's endowment to fund her lifestyle brands. It's a classic Ponzi structure, hidden behind a curtain of influencer marketing and charity galas." Elena picked up the drive. It was cold, heavy, and felt like a loaded weapon in her palm. "And the lab results," Julian's expression darkened. He handed her a physical folder, the paper crisp and smelling of fresh ink. "Chloe Sims came through. She managed to intercept the latest delivery of those vitamin supplements Serena has been forcing on you. The toxicology report is undeniable. It's a slow-acting metabolic disruptor, arsenic-based, designed to mimic the symptoms of early-onset dementia. It's not just theft, Elena. It's attempted murder." "She wanted me to fade away," Elena whispered, her eyes scanning the chemical breakdowns. "A quiet, tragic decline while she played the grieving, heroic sister. She didn't want my life, she wanted my silence." "She has neither," Julian replied. "I've already briefed Detective Marcus Miller. He's ready to move, but we need the public setting. If we take her down in private, she'll use her PR team to spin it as a family dispute. We need the witnesses. We need the fall to be televised." Elena stood, the weight of the evidence grounding her. "The Foundation Gala is in 48 hours. She's planning to announce her takeover of the chair position then. She thinks I'll be too confused to sign the protest papers." 48 hours, Julian confirmed. "Are you ready?" "I've been ready for 3 years," she said. The transition back to the Vance mansion felt like stepping into a lion's den, where the lion was too busy admiring its own reflection to notice the cage door closing. As Elena entered the foyer, the sharp, cloying scent of Serena's signature perfume, a suffocating blend of lilies and expensive chemicals, hit her like a physical blow. Serena was in the grand parlor, surrounded by a 3-person camera crew. She was wearing a silk robe that cost more than a teacher's annual salary, her face a mask of practiced, radiant empathy. "And here she is," Serena cooed, turning her dazzling, predatory smile toward the hallway as the cameraman swung the lens around. My brave, beautiful sister. Elena, darling, don't be shy. Tell the followers how you're feeling today. Is the fog lifting at all, or is it another gray day? The crew looked at Elena with pitying eyes, witnesses to a tragedy that didn't exist. Elena let her shoulders slump, her gaze drifting toward the floor in a practiced show of disorientation. I forgot where I put my tea, Serena, Elena murmured, her voice thin and wavering. Serena sighed, a theatrical sound designed for the microphone clipped to her lapel. She turned back to the camera. You see, it's heartbreaking. Some days she doesn't even recognize her own home. That's why the Vance Foundation is so vital. We're not just fighting for a cure. We're fighting for the dignity of those who can no longer fight for themselves. Serena, a gruff voice interrupted from the doorway. Arthur Vance stepped into the room, his eyes fixed on a tablet. He didn't look at Elena. He rarely did anymore. The quarterly projections for the endowment are down 3%. I told you to keep the overhead low on this gala. Oh, hush, Daddy, Serena snapped, the empathy vanishing from her voice the second she thought the camera wasn't catching it. The gala is an investment. We need the elite to see me as the face of the brand before we finalize the transition. Besides, she glanced at Elena with a look of pure, icy contempt. It's not like Elena is using the money for her future. She's barely in the present. Arthur grunted, a sound of dismissive agreement. Just make sure the paperwork is ready for the board. I don't want any legal hiccups when we move the remaining assets. Elena felt the familiar burn of rage in her chest, but she dampened it, burying it under the mask of the sleeping lion. She watched as Serena directed the maid to clear away a stack of Elena's old architectural journals. Throw those out, Serena said, gesturing vaguely at the priceless sketches. They're just cluttering up the aesthetic for the vlog. Elena doesn't even remember what she drew in them anyway. The maid hesitated, looking at Elena, who simply stared blankly at a vase of dying roses. I said throw them out. Serena's voice rose, the entitled bully breaking through the influencer's polish. I'm the one running this house now. My word is the only one that matters. As the crew began to pack up, Serena walked over to Elena, leaning in close. The smell of the perfume was nauseating. 2 more days, Elena, she whispered, her voice a jagged blade. After the gala, I'm moving you to the specialized facility in upstate. You'll have a lovely view of the trees while your brain turns to mush. It's for the best, really. You're such a burden. Serena patted Elena's cheek with a mocking affection and swept out of the room, her laughter echoing up the marble staircase. Elena waited until the front door clicked shut behind the camera crew. She reached into her pocket, her fingers brushing the cold metal of the flash drive Julian had given her. She looked at the orchid she had watered with Serena's poison 2 nights ago. The plant was black, its leaves curled into shriveled claws. She pulled her phone from her waistband and sent a 3-word text to Julian and Detective Miller. The stage is set. The countdown had reached the final 48 hours, and for the first time in years, Elena Vance wasn't afraid of the dark. She was the one waiting in it. The following afternoon, the Vance estate hummed with the frantic, hollow energy of a stage being set for a tragedy Serena Vance still believed was a triumph. Elena Vance watched from the shadows of the mezzanine, her fingers tracing the cold, polished mahogany of the railing. Below, the foyer had been transformed into a staging ground for tomorrow's gala. The air was thick with the cloying, suffocating scent of thousands of imported white lilies, a fragrance that felt more like a funeral than a celebration. Serena stood at the center of the chaos, her voice a sharp, staccato whip as she directed the event staff. She held a velvet-lined box in her hand, the contents catching the afternoon sun. It was their mother's sapphire pendant, the one item Elena had begged to keep. Log this for the silent auction, Chloe, Serena said, tossing the box toward Chloe Sims without looking. We need a showstopper for the legacy category. It's not like it's doing any good tucked away in a dusty drawer. Chloe Sims caught the box, her eyes darting nervously toward the stairs where Elena stood. But Miss Vance, isn't that your sister's favorite? My sister doesn't have favorites anymore, Serena snapped, her laughter thin and brittle. She barely has a memory. By this time tomorrow, She'll be lucky if she remembers how to use a fork. Now move. I want those displays finished before the photographers arrive. Arthur Vance emerged from the study, a glass of amber liquid already in his hand despite the early hour. He didn't look up as he passed the pile of Elena's belongings being tagged for sale. He simply nodded when Serena mentioned the projected donation totals. To him, the erasure of his eldest daughter was merely a line item in a recovery plan for the family's dwindling reputation. He sipped his drink, the ice clinking against the crystal with a rhythmic, indifferent sound that made Elena's jaw tighten. Elena began her descent, her movements slow and deliberate, maintaining the facade of a woman lost in a fog. As she reached the bottom step, Serena blocked her path, the smell of her expensive tuberose perfume hitting Elena like a physical blow. "Lost again, Elena," Serena sneered, reaching out to adjust Elena's collar with a mocking, sisterly touch. Her designer heels clicked aggressively against the marble. "Don't worry. Tomorrow night is the last time you'll have to navigate this big, confusing house. I've already packed your bags. Most of your things are already sold anyway. Think of it as a fresh start." Elena looked directly into her sister's eyes, dropping the vacant stare for a fraction of a second. "You should be careful, Serena," she whispered, her voice low and steady. "When you strip a house down to its bones just to show it off, you might find that the foundation was the only thing holding the roof up. Some things are safer left in the dark." Serena paused, her smirk faltering for a heartbeat before she let out a sharp, dismissive bark of laughter. She turned to the florist, waving a hand toward Elena as if she were a piece of furniture in the wrong place. "See, this is what I deal with, rambling nonsense about foundations. It's heartbreaking, really." Elena didn't respond. She walked past her sister, her hand slipping into the pocket of her cardigan to touch the jagged edge of the flash drive Julian Thorne had encrypted for her. The weight of it was a comfort, a secret weapon that felt heavier than all the diamonds Serena had stolen. She retreated to the sunroom, where the sound of the florist's shears provided a rhythmic, metallic countdown. Snip, snip, snip. Elena pulled her phone from its hiding place behind a loose floorboard. A message from Detective Marcus Miller sat on the screen, warrant signed. "We move when the first toast is poured." The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, skeletal shadows across the manicured lawn. Elena watched the workers hang the massive Vance Legacy banner over the ballroom entrance. Serena thought she was hosting a coronation. She didn't realize she was building her own gallows. Elena leaned her head against the cool glass of the window. The stage was set, the audience was invited, and the lead actress was blinded by her own spotlight. Tomorrow, the curtain would rise, and for the first time in her life, Elena wouldn't be the victim. She would be the one holding the script. The evening arrived with a chilling punctuality, the sky bruised purple and orange as the first limousines began to crawl up the winding driveway of the Vance estate. The scent of 1,000 white lilies, heavy and cloying, choked the grand foyer, mingling with the sharp, metallic tang of expensive cologne. Serena Vance stood at the top of the twin marble staircases, her silhouette framed by the glow of a crystal chandelier that cost more than most people's homes. She wore a gown of liquid gold, a shimmering armor of stolen wealth that caught every flicker of light. She was the sun around which the room orbited, her laughter a practiced, melodic chime that rang out over the low hum of the string quartet. She adjusted a diamond cuff on her wrist, her eyes scanning the crowd with the predatory precision of a hawk. To the 300 donors and socialites below, she was the grieving yet resilient visionary, the woman carrying the Vance legacy on her slender shoulders. She didn't see the cracks in the foundation she had built. She only saw the cameras. Elena Vance stepped out of the shadows of the coach room, her presence a sudden, cool draft in the sweltering heat of the ballroom. She wore navy silk, a dress that was elegant but intentionally understated, designed to disappear against the opulence. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, polished bun, and her eyes, once clouded by the feigned fog of cognitive decline, were now as sharp as broken glass. She didn't move like a victim anymore. She moved like a woman who knew exactly where the tripwires were buried. "There she is," Serena's voice cut through the air, loud enough to draw the attention of a nearby cluster of board members. She descended the stairs, her silk train hissing against the marble like a serpent. "My poor, brave sister. I wasn't sure you'd have the strength to leave your room tonight, Elena. The lights, the noise. It can be so overwhelming for someone in your condition." A ripple of sympathetic murmurs moved through the witnesses. Arthur Vance, standing nearby with a glass of scotch that was far from his first, gave a stiff, uncomfortable nod. He looked at his eldest daughter not with love, but with the weary irritation one might feel toward a broken appliance. Chloe Sims, standing just a few feet away in a server's uniform, gripped her tray so hard her knuckles turned white. Her eyes met Elena's for a fleeting second, a silent acknowledgement of the poison Serena had been feeding the family for years. "I wouldn't miss this for the world," Elena said, her voice steady and low. She reached out, her fingers grazing the cold condensation on a passing waiter's champagne flute. "It's a night for legacies, isn't it? For seeing things as they truly are." Serena leaned in, the cloying sweetness of her perfume, a custom blend of jasmine and ego, filling the space between them. "Don't get ahead of yourself," she whispered, her smile never wavering for the benefit of the photographers. "After the toast, the car is already waiting. The facility in the valley is very discreet. You'll have all the peace and quiet your little mind needs. Permanently." She didn't wait for a response. Serena turned back to the crowd, her hand resting regally on her father's arm. "Arthur, darling, come. We need to greet the senator." Elena watched them walk away, her gaze shifting to the far corner of the room. Julian Thorne stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of mineral water in his hand. He didn't approach her, but the slight tilt of his head was all the confirmation she needed. The legal documents were filed. The digital trail was hot. The trap was no longer being set. It was waiting for the weight of Serena's footfall. The ballroom was a masterpiece of dramatic irony. The massive Vance Legacy banner hung over the stage, gold lettering on velvet, celebrating a history that Serena had spent the last 18 months dismantling through embezzlement and calculated cruelty. Elena moved through the crowd, a ghost in her own home. She passed the donors who had stopped calling her, the friends who had whispered about her episodes behind her back, and the father who had traded his daughter's safety for the preservation of his own comfort. 10 minutes, a voice murmured in her ear as she passed the buffet. Elena didn't turn. She knew Detective Marcus Miller was somewhere in the periphery, dressed in a tuxedo that didn't quite hide the tactical edge of his posture. The warrants were no longer just paper, they were a countdown. She found herself standing near the stage as the lights began to dim, the signal for the evening's climax. The string quartet transitioned into a triumphant, swelling crescendo. Serena stepped onto the dais, the golden fabric of her dress catching the spotlight until she seemed to glow with an ethereal, unearned light. She looked down at the sea of faces, the power, the money, the validation she craved more than breath itself. "Ladies and gentlemen," Serena began, her voice amplified and echoing off the vaulted ceiling. She held up a crystal flute, the bubbles dancing in the light. "Tonight, we don't just celebrate the past, we celebrate the future of the Vance name, a future built on integrity, strength, and the courage to make the hard choices." She looked directly at Elena, a flash of pure, venomous triumph in her eyes. It was the look of a woman who thought she had already won. Serena raised her glass higher, the signal for the servers to begin pouring the vintage champagne for the 300 guests. Elena felt her phone vibrate in the hidden pocket of her dress, one short pulse. The toast was being poured. The police were at the service entrance. Julian was moving toward the AV booth. The air in the room seemed to thicken, the scent of the lilies suddenly smelling less like a garden and more like a funeral. "To the legacy!" Serena cried out, her voice ringing with an arrogance that bordered on the divine. Elena's hand went to the small, silver brooch on her lapel, the one containing the high-definition microphone that had been broadcasting Serena's private threats to a recording device for the last hour. She didn't join the toast. Instead, she took a single step forward into the light, her eyes locked on her sister's face. The curtain was up, the audience was silent, and the script was about to change. The silence that followed Elena's step into the spotlight was heavier than the applause that had preceded it. Serena stood frozen, her champagne flute held aloft like a scepter, her smile beginning to fray at the edges. The scent of the lilies, cloyingly sweet and thick in the humid ballroom, seemed to choke the air as 300 pairs of eyes shifted from the golden sister to the one they had been told was fading away. "The toast is premature, Serena," Elena said. Her voice wasn't the frail whisper everyone expected. It was a clear, resonant bell that cut through the murmurs of the elite. Serena's eyes narrowed, a flash of the old, predatory fire sparking in her gaze. She stepped closer, the silk of her designer gown hissing against the stage floor. "Elena, darling, you're confused. The medication. You should be in bed." She turned to the crowd, projecting a mask of tragic concern. "I'm so sorry, everyone. My sister's condition is more advanced than we feared." "My condition is perfectly clear," Elena countered, her thumb pressing the hidden trigger on the brooch pinned to her chest. "And so is your ledger." On the massive LED screens behind the stage, the celebratory montage of the Vance family history flickered and died. In its place, a series of high-resolution bank statements surged into view. Bright red circles highlighted millions of dollars flowing from the Vance estate into a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. The room went deathly quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the air conditioning and the collective intake of breath from the front row. Arthur Vance surged to his feet, his face turning a mottled, terrifying shade of purple as he stared at the digital proof of his own ruin. Beside him, Chloe Sims stood tall, her arms crossed, her eyes fixed on the woman who had spent years bullying her into silence. Then, the audio kicked in. It wasn't music. It was Serena's voice, stripped of its public honey, echoing from the state-of-the-art speakers. "She's a vegetable, Julian. If the pills don't finish her mind, the isolation will. Just sign the damn transfer and let's be done with her." Serena's champagne glass slipped from her fingers. It didn't shatter. It landed on the thick carpet with a dull thud, the vintage liquid soaking into the fabric like a spreading wound. Serena's jaw didn't just drop. It seemed to unhinge as the color fled her skin, leaving her a sickly, translucent gray. Her eyes, usually so sharp and calculating, darted wildly around the room like a trapped animal, bulging with a terror she couldn't mask. The poise she had cultivated for decades evaporated in a single heartbeat, replaced by a raw, twitching desperation. Her chest heaved in shallow, jagged hitches, and a fine sheen of cold sweat broke out across her forehead, matting her perfect blonde hair against her temples. She looked small, suddenly, her expensive jewelry and custom gown appearing like a costume on a child caught in a lie. The goddess of the Vance Empire was dissolving in real time, her mouth opening and closing without a single sound emerging. "Is that the legacy you were talking about?" Elena asked, her voice devoid of heat. Detective Marcus Miller stepped out from the wings of the stage, the silver of his handcuffs catching the overhead lights. Behind him, 2 uniformed officers moved with practiced precision toward the podium. The socialites in the front row, the same people who had laughed at Serena's cruel jokes an hour ago, physically recoiled. They pulled their chairs back, the screech of metal on the floor sounding like a chorus of accusations. No one reached out to her, no one spoke in her defense. Serena finally found her voice, a shrill, broken thing. "It's a lie, she's crazy. Dad, tell them she's crazy." Arthur Vance didn't look at her. He was looking at the screen, at the numbers that proved his favorite daughter had been picking his pockets while he watched her crown herself. He sank back into his chair, looking every bit the broken old man he had become. Elena didn't stay to watch the officers reach her sister. She didn't need to hear the Miranda rights or the frantic, screeching denials that were already beginning to fill the hall. She turned her back on the stage, her eyes finding Julian Thorne on the balcony. He gave a single, sharp nod. The mission was complete. "You told me once that I didn't belong in this family because I lacked the killer instinct," Elena said, pausing at the edge of the stage. She looked back one last time at the shivering wreck of the woman who had tried to erase her. You were wrong. I just don't kill the innocent. She stepped down from the dais and walked toward the exit, the crowd parting before her like the Red Sea. She didn't look back as the first click of the handcuffs echoed through the ballroom. 10 minutes had passed since the first metallic snap of handcuffs had echoed through the Vance ballroom, but the air still tasted of ozone and expensive lilies. The Gala, once a sea of choreographed elegance, had devolved into a gallery of frozen statues. Guests stood with champagne flutes suspended in midair, their gazes darting between the shivering woman in the center of the room and the sister who had finally stopped playing the victim. Serena Vance didn't go quietly. Even as Detective Marcus Miller tightened his grip on her arm, she twisted, her heels skidding against the polished marble. "Do you have any idea who I am?" she shrieked, her voice cracking into a register her followers had never heard. "This is a setup. My sister is a delusional, sick woman. Marcus, let go of me this instant or I'll have your badge for breakfast." The detective didn't flinch. He simply signaled to his partner, who stepped forward with a heavy evidence bag. Inside, the clear plastic shimmered with small, amber vials recovered from Serena's vanity. "We have the toxicology reports, Ms. Vance," Miller said, his voice a low, rhythmic rumble that cut through her hysterics. "And we have the testimony from the pharmacy where you bypassed the regulations. It's over." Arthur Vance stumbled forward, his face the color of ash. He looked at the ledger in his hands, the one Elena had forced him to see, and then at the daughter he had spent years coddling. "Serena," he whispered, his voice trembling, "the offshore accounts, the medical power of attorney you used to drain the Vance Trust. Is it true?" "Dad, don't listen to her." Serena lunged toward him, her movements jagged and desperate. "Elena forged those. She's been jealous of my success since we were kids. She's trying to steal my life because she has nothing." "I have the truth, Serena," Elena said, her voice cutting through the noise like a scalpel. She stood 10 feet away, her posture perfect, her expression as unreadable as a frozen lake. "And I have the audit." The rage in Serena's eyes flared. She turned her venom on Chloe Sims, who stood trembling behind the detective. "You," she spat, a fleck of foam appearing at the corner of her mouth. "You pathetic, low-life little rat, I gave you everything. I paid your rent and you go to the police because Elena offered you a bigger check. You're nothing without me." "I went to the police because I watched you put those drops in her tea every night for a year," Chloe whispered, her voice gaining strength as she met Serena's hateful glare. "I watched you laugh while she forgot her own name. I'm not the rat, Serena. I'm the witness." It was in that moment that Serena's meticulously crafted mask didn't just slip, it disintegrated. The vibrant, healthy glow she'd maintained for her millions of followers vanished, replaced by a sickly gray pallor that made her look years older in seconds. Her eyes, usually wide and sparkling with rehearsed innocence, shrunk into frantic, darting pinpricks of terror. Her mouth hung open, her perfectly lined lips trembling so violently that she couldn't form a coherent word. A single streak of waterproof mascara tracked a black, jagged line down her cheek, cutting through the heavy foundation like a crack in a porcelain doll. Her posture, once regal and commanding, slumped until she seemed to shrink inside her designer gown, her shoulders shaking with a primal, jagged breath that sounded more like a cornered animal than a socialite. The golden child was gone, replaced by a hollow, terrified girl who finally realized that her beauty and her brand were powerless against the weight of the law. Arthur Vance let out a broken, wheezing sound. He didn't reach for her. Instead, he stepped back, his hand finding the edge of a table for support. The enabler had finally run out of excuses. "I'm so sorry, Elena," he choked out, his eyes finally finding his eldest daughter. "I didn't know. I should have seen." "You chose not to see, Father," Elena replied, her tone devoid of both anger and forgiveness. "And now you'll have plenty of time to look at the wreckage." She turned her gaze to Detective Miller. "The forensic files are already on your server, Detective. Every transaction, every forged signature, and every dose of the sedative she used to keep me compliant. You'll find that Julian Thorne has already prepared the civil injunctions to freeze what's left of the accounts." Serena began to wail then, a thin, high-pitched sound of pure, selfish grief. As the officers began to lead her toward the exit, she thrashed one last time, her designer heels kicking uselessly against the floor. The guests parted like a receding tide, their faces twisted in a mixture of horror and morbid fascination. The phones were out now, but they weren't filming a glamorous lifestyle vlog. They were capturing the live-streamed death of a reputation. Elena felt the biting cold of the brass door handle as she reached the foyer. She didn't stay to watch the police cruiser doors slam shut. She didn't stay to hear her father's pleas for a conversation she had no intention of having. She stepped out into the crisp night air, the scent of rain on pavement washing away the cloying perfume of the ballroom. Julian Thorne was waiting by the black sedan, his silhouette sharp against the city lights. He didn't ask if she was okay. He simply opened the door. "Is it done?" he asked. Elena looked back at the Vance mansion, the lights flickering inside as the crowd began to disperse. The kingdom was in ruins, the queen was in chains, and the sleeping lion was finally truly awake. "No," Elena said, sliding into the leather seat. "This was just the audit. Now we begin the liquidation." She didn't look back as the car pulled away, leaving the echoes of Serena's screams and the hollow shell of her family legacy in the rearview mirror. For the first time in 5 years, the fog was gone, and the road ahead was perfectly clear. 6 months had passed since the walls of the Vance empire had come crashing down in a storm of flashing blue lights and forensic spreadsheets. The transition had been surgical, a total liquidation of the life Elena Vance once knew, replaced by a silence that was both liberating and heavy. She sat in her new office on the 42nd floor, the glass walls offering a panoramic view of the city she had finally conquered. The air here didn't smell of Serena's cloying, expensive lilies. It smelled of fresh espresso and the crisp, clean scent of high-grade bond paper. She picked up a heavy fountain pen, its weight a grounding presence against her palm, and signed the final acquisition papers for the new firm. Julian Thorne leaned against the doorframe, watching her with a quiet, observant smile. He looked different without the frantic energy of the investigation clinging to him, more relaxed, though his eyes remained as sharp as ever. "The final sentencing report just came in from Detective Marcus Miller," he said, stepping into the room. He didn't need to say more. He placed a thin manila folder on her mahogany desk. Elena didn't open it immediately. She didn't need to. She already knew the contents. Serena Vance was no longer a name that commanded a digital army of millions. She was inmate number 77,419, stripped of her ring lights, her designer silk robes, and her carefully curated filters. The last time Elena had seen a photo of her, a grainy image leaked from the state-mandated psychiatric evaluation, her sister's face had been unrecognizable. Without the makeup and the arrogance to mask it, she looked hollow, her skin sallow from the lack of luxury, her eyes darting with a paranoia that no longer had an audience. 12 years, Julian said softly. With the poisoning charges and the grand larceny, the judge wasn't interested in leniency, especially not after Chloe Sims gave that final testimony about the hidden vials in the vanity. Elena nodded, her gaze drifting back to the window. The justice was proportional, a mirror image of the slow, agonizing confinement Serena had tried to trap her in. Serena had wanted Elena to lose her mind in a gilded cage. Now Serena would lose her youth in a concrete one. "And my father?" Elena asked. "Arthur is surviving," Julian replied, his tone shifting to something more somber. "The mansion was sold at auction 3 weeks ago to cover the restitution to the shareholders. He's moved into a 2-bedroom apartment near the outskirts. He calls the office twice a day, Elena. He still wants to explain." "There is nothing left to explain," she said, her voice like a sheet of ice. "He watched me wither for 5 years and chose the comfort of his bank account over the life of his daughter. Silence was his contribution to my funeral. He can keep it now." She felt a momentary pang in her chest, a ghost of the girl who used to wait for him to come home from business trips with stories and sweets. That girl was gone, buried under the weight of the betrayal he had permitted. This was the cost of the crown. She had her father's company, her sister's fortune, and her own sanity, but the dinner table was empty. Julian walked over to the desk and tapped the folder. "The audit is officially closed. You're the majority shareholder of the restructured Vance Thorne Associates. You won, Elena." "I did," she whispered. She stood and walked to the window, watching the sunset bleed crimson across the skyline. She thought of the night she had sat in the dark of her bedroom, pretending to be confused while she secretly recorded Serena's laughter. She thought of the bitter taste of the tainted tea and the way her heart used to hammer against her ribs in terror. The fear was gone now, replaced by a cold, unwavering clarity. She had become the lion she was always meant to be, but the jungle felt remarkably still. Her phone buzzed on the desk. It was a notification from a news app. A "Where are they now?" piece on the Vance scandal. She swiped it away without reading. The public had moved on to the next tragedy, the next fallen star, but Elena lived in the aftermath every single day. She looked at her reflection in the glass. Her eyes were bright, her posture perfect, her mind sharper than a razor. She was the victor in a war of her own making, standing atop a mountain of broken glass and tarnished silver. "Julian," she called out as he turned to leave. "Yes. Make sure the trust for Chloe's medical bills is fully funded by the end of the week. She was the only one who saw me when I was invisible. I don't want her to ever feel that way again. Consider it done." As the door clicked shut, Elena picked up the family photograph she kept in her top drawer, the only one she hadn't burned. It was from a summer at the lake, years before the greed had taken root. She looked at the three of them, smiling and whole, before the poison had entered their lives. With a steady hand, she placed the photo face down. The kingdom was hers, the debt was paid, and the road ahead was finally, hauntingly clear. She walked out of the office, her heels clicking a steady, rhythmic beat against the marble floor. The sound of a woman who no longer had to hide, and a lion who would never sleep again.
I hope you enjoyed this wild story. Don't forget to subscribe for more. See you in the next one.